Need some spicy Time Spiral Remastered reprints, maybe some cool old border cards? Well, you can pre-order Time Spiral Remastered now from our sponsor Card Kingdom by heading over to cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Time Spiral Remastered spoilers. And today, we finally reached the highlight of the set, colorless and multicolor cards. And we've been talking about throughout the week how the set, the main set at least, it hasn't looked like it has a ton of value. A lot of like mythic, some decent rares, but some bulk rares too. Well, today I think is a big money day, because that's where the money is in Time Spiral Block, colorless and multicolored, which means we got a ton of cards to talk about, valuable main set reprints, sweet old border cards, so we should probably jump right into it. Start talking new Time Spiral Remastered stuff. And first off today, thanks to Wizards being amazing and hooking us up with a preview card, we have our exclusive MTGGoldfish preview cards. And I'm not going to talk super long about these cards, because I wrote an entire article. Click the card, read the article if you want to hear more about these cards. But they include the only old border card that really matters, which is Old Border Panharmonicon, one of my two favorite cards in all of Magic, alongside Blood Moon. We have played so many Panharmonicon decks in Standard, in Modern, in Pioneer, in Historic, in Commander, you name it, we have doubled up our ETB triggers with a Panharmonicon. And then also Vesuva, which is a pretty pricey card, and that's one I associate with Richard, because Richard is a big believer in playing Vesuva in essentially all your Commander decks, which is a theory I've kind of come around on. And Vesuva, it's like a $35 card too, so another Mythic that you're going to be thrilled to open. So Panharmonicon, I mean, I don't know, what's better than drawing 2 cards with your Old Border Mulldrifter? Drawing 4 cards with your Old Border Mulldrifter, and that's really all you gotta say. Like, Panharmonicon, it enables some janky combos, it super powers your ETB triggers, it is just a super fun card to play with. As far as Vesuva, it shows up a little bit in 60 card formats, where like in Legacy Cloud Post decks, it's another copy of Cloud Post. Sometimes Amulet Titan decks in Modern play it as a one of tutor target, but I think its true home is in Commander, where in Commander, you can use this to snag copies of your opponent's utility lands. Like if your opponent's on Cabal Coffers Urborg, and you're playing a mono white deck, let's say, your Vesuva can copy their Cabal Coffers, and then all of a sudden you're making oodles of mana too. You can copy Gaia's Cradle, so maybe you're a budget deck, you can't afford a Gaia's Cradle, well maybe you can get a copy from your opponent, even just an Ancient Tomb. In the worst case, you can copy a random basic land. It's really hard for Vesuva to be dead. The only downside is it does come into play tapped, so that keeps it in check a little bit, but still, that is a small cost to pay for the potential power of Vesuva. So Vesuva, solid value reprint, play it more in Commander. Panharmonicon, definitely the old border card that I am most excited about, and I cannot wait to pick up some copies of this card, and probably gonna end up kind of expensive too for Commander purposes. We also got the reprint you have all been waiting for, the biggest money reprint of the set, which is Sliver Legion. Sliver Legion closing in on $150 based exclusively on scarcity and Commander play, giving all your slivers +1/+1 for each other sliver on the battlefield. That's going to make your slivers really massive, allow them to close up the game. Sliver Legion actually ranks fairly low in the hierarchy of Sliver commanders. You got Sliver Overlord, that's pretty much better. Sliver Queen, mostly better. First Sliver, mostly better. Kind of on par with Sliver Hive Lord. The thing is, Sliver Legion shows up in the 99 of essentially all your 5-color Sliver decks in Commander, or at least many of them, where it's just a way to make your Slivers super duper ultra massive and close out the game, plus it's ridiculously expensive. So this is a reprint we desperately needed. So well done, Wizards, getting the most expensive card from all of Time Spiral Block into the set. This is a Mythic you want to open most, bar none. We also got Gemstone Caverns, which is another super expensive card, coming in at like $65. Now that Simian Spirit Guide has been banned out of Modern, Gemstone Caverns is your best way to make fast mana. Like, yes, there's a cost. You gotta be on the draw, you gotta have it in your opening hand, you have to exile another card from your hand, but if you can hit those conditions, you're gonna start off your first turn with 2 mana rather than 1, which makes it a key way to enable combos, essentially. Like, if you wanna Blood Moon someone as quickly as possible, now that Simian Spirit Guide gone, Gemstone Caverns, Ritual Blood Moon is your best option. It speeds up Living End style decks, it speeds up Heliad Walking Ballista combo decks. So Gemstone Caverns, it's a a card that no one ever plays for fair purposes. It's always played to speed up some sort of unfair deck or some sort of Prisony Lock style deck. Those are the reasons you play it. You're not just going to play this in your random Jund mid-range deck because you care too much about the cards in your hand, more than you care about one extra mana to get your Tarmogoyf down or something. But because a lot of decks play this card, it's really expensive, really needed a reprint. $65, another Mythic you're definitely going to want to open. We got a colorless Mythic, Akroma's Memorial. And Akroma's Memorial, it is a really expensive card. It is more expensive than you think. It has been reprinted in a core set, and it's still $35. It doesn't see a ridiculous amount of play in Commander, but it does see some play. And giving all your creatures Akroma's abilities, essentially flying, first strike, vigilance, triple haste, 2 protections, is absurd if you can get it on the battlefield. Its primary home in Commander right now is actually in Akroma decks. Since it gives all Akroma's abilities, it works really well with Akroma, plus it's on flavor because it's another Akroma card, so it usually shows up with Akroma. Also shows up in some Legendary Matters decks where like Captain Sisay can tutor it out, Reiki can draw cards as you're casting your Akroma's Memorial. So even though Akroma's Memorial is kind of like mid-tier or even like a little bit below in terms of how much play it sees in Commander, it is a really valuable, really iconic card, and hopefully it gets a lot cheaper, down from $35, I don't know, maybe $20, maybe $15, so people can pick up the copies they need at a discount thanks to Time Spiral Remastered. Speaking of valuable old border reprints, we also got Cloud Key, and Cloud Key is a card that I honestly did not realize was expensive as it is. It is a $35 rare, even though it only kind of sees fringe play in Commander. So Cloud Key makes cards of a chosen type cost 1 less, and it mostly sees play as a combo piece, primarily with Sensei's Divining Top. The idea is you get Cloud Key on Artifact, so then your Sensei's Divining Top is free, and if you can throw in something like Alicia or Mystic Forge or Future Sight or Magus of the Future, you've assembled a combo where you essentially draw your deck. You cast the top for free off the top of your deck, tap it to draw whatever is on the top of your deck, putting top back on top of your deck, then cast the top again for free. That gives you essentially infinite storm count, or storm count equal to the number of cards in your deck. It's going to grow your Alicia really big, trigger Prowess a bunch of times, and you get to draw literally every card in your deck, which is, I guess, one of the big reasons Cloud Key is so expensive. The other reason Cloud Key is so expensive is this is the first time it has ever been reprinted. It was reprinted in original Time Spiral block. It's been 15 years or something, and has not been reprinted a single time. So this is one I expect will get a lot cheaper. It's at rare. Part of its price is because it's pretty scarce and hard to find, and it does see Commander play. So really solid reprint. One of the rares you're going to want to crack open in your pack, and if you want to play one of those combos in your Commander deck, this will give you a chance to pick it up at a discount. We also got a couple of sweet rare lads. Dryad Arbor, kind of a $15-ish rare. Tolarian West, like $8. Both of these lands really unique, really powerful. Dryad Arbor primarily shows up as either a Green Sun Zenith target in Legacy, where turns Green Sun Zenith into a 1-mana rampant growth. You just on turn 1 green mana, find your Dryad Arbor, start your ramping, or it shows up in some like creature light decks, like Infect or Boggles, where you play one of these, hopefully you don't draw it, floats around in your deck, and if you get desperate and you don't find a Boggle or an Infect creature, you can always use a fetch land to tutor up your Dryad Arbor and, I don't know, throw some auras on it, throw some pump spells at it, maybe win the game that way. As far as Tolaria West, it shows up in 2 places primarily. One is, because it transmutes for things that cost 0, it's essentially a land tutor. So one of the things that we see people do at Tolaria West is play it with Primeval Titan and Bounce lands. Primeval Titan can tutor it up, Bounce Land can put it back in your hand. Then you can transmute your Tolaria West to find like a Summoner's Pact, or you can find like a Blast Zone or some important land for your deck. The other place it sees play is in like free spell tribal. If you see like the Restore Balance, Ancestral Visions decks that are using As Foretold, Tolaria West is 3 mana, find your Restore Balance, find your Ancestral Vision, which is why it maintains a pretty reasonable price tag. So both Tolaria West and Dryad Arbor, super solid rare reprints, adding more value to the packs. On the other hand, we still got some bulk rares. Yoira of the Gitu, kind of an infamous commander that people sometimes rank on their saltiest commander list. Putting big things in exile and casting them 4 turns later is really scary. Just like ramp into this with 2 extra mana, suspend a big Eldrazi or something, but it's been reprinted a bunch, so only like a $1 card. On the other hand, we got another really valuable land in Flagstones of Trokir, which is kind of a weird one. Flagstones was a fairly cheap card for a long time, but it has recently been really creeping up in price for, I guess, one big reason, one smaller reason. The big reason is Wizards printed Cleansing Wildfire in Battle for Zendikar, and that turned Flagstones of Trocir into this weird ramp spell. You can play Flagstones, Cleansing Wildfire on Flagstones. You get to draw a card, you get to get a land from Cleansing Wildfire, and you get to get a land from Flagstones of Trocir. So you're going down one land, you're getting two lands and another card, turning into like this weird, super rampant growth that you can play outside of green, which is really powerful in like Jeskai control decks. So that's one of the big reasons. The other reason is we've kind of seen a rise of Boros Prison. It's not a tier 1 deck, but it is a deck people have been playing, and being able to boom your own Flagstones and get a land is a way to turn Boom Bust into an actual sinkhole. So this increase in demand has pushed Flagstones up near $20, making it another chase rare that you can open in your pack. As far as Mythics, we have another card that is probably more expensive than you'd guess based on the amount of play that you'd see. Gauntlet of Power. So Gauntlet of Power, cheapest version, around like $23. However, this is another card that's partly expensive because it hasn't really been reprinted. There was a Kaladesh Invention that doesn't really count as a full reprinting, even though it's a little bit of extra supply. So this hasn't really been reprinted since Time Spiral. It doesn't see a ton of play in Commander, but it does show up with expensive monocolor commanders on occasion. Stuff like Akroma or Maga or Avacyn. If you're trying to ramp into big commanders and other big spells, and you're monocolored so you can play a lot of basic lands of the chosen color, then Gauntlet of Power can be a pretty effective ramp spell. But being restricted just to basic lands is an issue for playing it in multicolor decks, and we've gotten a lot of like Zendikar Resurgence and other similar effects that don't have as much of a restriction as Gauntlet of Power, which is why it doesn't really see that much play. Good news is price should come down quite a bit even with this at Mythic because it just hasn't been reprinted, so getting any new supply in the market is going to be a big deal for Gauntlet of Power. As far as the rest of the green cards in the main set, we got one more Mythic, the green free spell in Hypergenesis, and this is one of the least valuable of the free spells for a big reason, which is it is banned in a lot of places, like Modern, and it doesn't see play in other places because it's super risky. Allowing each player to essentially dump their hands of permanents can go really, really wrong. There was one super fringe legacy deck a long time ago that was like cascading into it and trying to play a bunch of like Emeralds, Grizzlebrands, but the big problem is in a format like Commander even, where you think, okay, I just put a bunch of big stuff in my deck, then I Hypergenesis, maybe cascade into it, maybe suspend it, then I'm going to dump like all my Ulamogs and Crater Hoofs and just win the game. But remember, you're up against 3 opponents, so they each are going to be able to do that too. Like, sure, if you literally have like Crater Hoof and you give all your stuff haste somehow, maybe you could just win the game on the spot, but really Hypergenesis is just way too risky for most Commander decks. So combining the risk of the card, keeping it out of formats like Commander, it's banned in Modern, and its lack of legacy play, it's only like a $2 card. So another Mythic that probably going to hope to miss. The good news is green did get a solid rare reprint in Summoner's Pack, which has been reprinted in a couple of master sets so far, still over $10, tutoring up a green creature for free, really powerful in a couple of places. One is it shows up in Primeval Titan decks, the Amulet Titan decks, where you can tutor this up with your Teleria West. Then it finds your Primeval Titan, then Primeval Titan finds a bunch of lands, which allows you to pay for the Summoner's Pack pretty painlessly. Like if you're wrapping a bunch of lands into play, what's 4 mana the next turn? Plus, you could do shenanigans where you like get another Teleria West, get another Summoner's Pack, get another Primeval Titan. So that's the biggest home, although it also shows up in Legacy Oops All spells, which is a little strange. In Legacy Oops All spells, you're really using this as just like an extra copy of Elvish Spirit Guide, because it only gets green creatures, so you can't find your like Balustrade Spy, Undercity Informer, your big payoffs, but it's essentially just a weird ritual in the deck, because it's going to find something that's +1 mana, and in Oops All spells, you're just really counting to 4. If you can count to 4 and your opponent doesn't have Force of Will, you just win the game with Balustrade Spire, Undercity Informant, milling your entire deck. So Summoner's Pact, solid value, very playable, great reprint Time Spiral Remastered. We also got Felda Havenwood, which, another bulk level rare. Kind of a fungus lord, which means it does show up in some, like, Slimefoot commander decks, but funguses / saprolegs, not really the most powerful or playable tribe, which means Thelen pretty much just lurks in the bulk rare range. As far as old border cards, we got some really good ones. Corsair Grufix, kind of an all-star in Commander, shows up in Modern decks. As far as Modern and even Pioneer are concerned, most mostly shows up in two styles of decks. Collected Company decks, for example, because you can hit Courser off Collected Company, playing lands off the top of your deck, kind of pseudo card advantage, life gain good against aggro. Also shows up in Traverse the Uvenwald style decks, because it's an enchantment creature, so it's a way you can play a bunch of creatures and still maybe end up with an enchantment in your graveyard. Also sees play in land-based commander decks, especially decks that are about extra land drops, like Azusa, Minanden, with commanders that let you play extra lands, and the ability to play lands off the top of your deck. It becomes really easy to ramp, hit a bunch of land drops, accelerate your mana base, and play some big things, also like Lord Windgrace, any land shenanigan types decks. However, I do have one piece of criticism about this card, and one question as to whether they should have chosen Courser of Kruphix as an old border card at all, which is, it is an enchantment creature, and enchantment creatures have always had an enchantment creature frame, kind of like the snow frame that we're seeing with Kaldheim. It's a way that players have a visual cue that, okay, this creature's different than a normal creature. So you can see the original Courser, it's got like the Nyx frame or whatever. The new Courser, it's not really clear that it's an enchantment creature. Like, at a glance, if you're not familiar with Courser of Kruphix, you're not going to see it and be like, okay, I better take another look at this card. Something's different about this card. I mean, maybe that doesn't matter anymore in a world of showcase cards and all the promos we're getting today, but I still think it's a little bit strange that players don't have that visual cue that's an enchantment creature. But regardless, solid reprint, looks good in old border, even if it is a little bit weird that's an enchantment creature that doesn't necessarily look like one. We also got Beast Within, which is just a commander ultra staple, like giving your green deck a way to kill literally anything. A 3/3 beast, not a big drawback. It is the third most played green card, period, in commander. It goes Cultivate, Kadama's Reach, Beast Within. Green has a ton of insane ramp spells, which are like the focus of the commander format, so beating out most of those ramp spells is absolutely absurd. That's how good Beast Within is. So I expect this one to be relatively expensive for commander players, and foil's going to be through the roof. We also got Nature's Claim, which sees a surprising amount of play as a sideboard card. Being able to blow up any artifact or enchantment for 1 mana, very efficient. Yes, your opponent gains 4 life, but there's a lot of decks that get around this restriction. Like, for example, this sees play in, like, dredge decks, where you can blow up a hate card, Rest in Peace, Leyline of the Void. Shows up in Tron decks, shows up in Infect decks, and the thing about all these decks is they don't really care about your opponent gaining 4 life. Like, sure, if you're playing Burn or something, giving your opponent 4 life, it's devastating. You just wouldn't play it, you wouldn't do it. But a deck like Dredge or a deck like Tron, when they win, they're winning by so much that 4 life is actually irrelevant. And Infect is another good example. Like, Infect doesn't care about life at all. Like, it's free because you're trying to kill you with poison counters rather than actual damage, which makes Nature's Claim a sideboard all-star in various formats from Modern all the way back to Legacy. Also sees some Commander play as well, where 4 life in a 40 life format, whatever, not a big deal. Sylvan Scrying, another mostly Modern focused reprint, although a little bit of Commander and Pioneer value as well. The main thing Sylvan Scrying does in Commander is assemble land-based combos. Like, maybe you're trying to Dark Depths Thesmian Stage, maybe you're trying to Cabal Coffers Urborg. Sylvan Scrying can find whatever piece you're missing. The drawback, of course, is a land goes into your hand rather than on the battlefield, so if you're just trying to ramp into, whatever generic big thing, you don't usually play Sylvan Scrying. It's good for finding specific non-basic lands, not for ramping you, because it's not actually a ramp spell, it's just a land tutor. On the other hand, we see some constructed decks that are really built around Sylvan Scrying. In Pioneer, the Lotus Field combo deck uses Sylvan Scrying as extra copies of Lotus Field. Tron is probably the biggest example. In Modern, Sylvan Scrying, one of the easiest ways for, like, mono-green Tron to assemble Tron, start casting their cards in Ugins. So Sylvan Scrying, another solid card, originally an uncommon, does look sweet with the new art. Like, sometimes when I see these cards with the old border, I'm like, I really wish I had the old art. Sylvan Scrying, I really like the new art, and I think it looks really sweet in the old frame. We also got, I don't know, what I would consider a couple of dud old border cards. Not that these cards are horrible, like Time of Need, tutoring up a legend, maybe some sort of like legendary tribal deck in Commander, even though it doesn't really see that much play in Commander. Evolutionary Leap, I used to love playing this card in Standard, hasn't really caught on too much outside of Standard though, so looking sharp in the old frame, and they're not bad cards by any mean, but I would rank them behind the other old border cards we've seen today. Moving on to colorless and multicolor old border cards, Arcadian Arcades the Strategist makes its return, the Defender, Commander / Wall payoff, and I honestly didn't realize just how popular Arcades was. It's actually the #2 banned commander behind Tulane, which Tulane is just absolutely busted, but Arcades is a really popular build around, and I gotta say, multicolor cards in the old border, oh, they are so amazing. It brings me back, like this Arcades, it could be printed in Legends. It could be one of the original Elder Dragons. It looks so awesome in the old border. So well done, Wizards, on the old border gold cards. So Arcades, I mean, Commander Demand doesn't do anything outside of that, but if I build Arcades in Commander, you can bet that this is going to be the version leading my deck. Speaking of Commanders, we also got Feather the Redeemed, which is an incredibly powerful and popular commander, plus it sees a little bit of play outside of Commander. So in Commander, Feather is the #1 Boros commander, a top 15 overall commander, and it's really not even close how far Feather is above the next best card. The next most played Boros commander is Winota, and Feather sees 3 times as much play as Winota. It is not even close. It is far and away the most popular Boros build-around commander because it generates a ton of card advantage, and that's something that Boros tends to struggle with. It does it in a weird way with returning your instants and sorceries that target your stuff to your hand, but it's still spectacular in Commander. Also, shows up a little bit in Pioneer. There is like a Feather heroic deck. We're using God's Willing, Defiant Strike to cast them repeatedly to generate card advantage, protect your stuff, grow 10th Surface Legionnaires, Laguna Band Trailblazers. So another really solid old border reprint, primarily for Commander, but also a little bit for other formats as well. We also got a couple of okay brown border artifact reprints. Everflowing Chalice, Contagion Clasp, and these cards, probably some of the least playable old border cards we've seen so far. Again, not that they're bad, they're just narrow enough that they usually only see play in very specific Commander decks and don't really see play outside of Commander. So Everflowing Chalice sees play in 2 places. It sees play in kicker decks, like Verazol, that take advantage of its multi-kicker text. Also, sees play in colorless ramp decks. If you're playing Kozilek or Emrakul, then Everflowing Chalice is great, because in those decks, all you want to do is ramp as fast as possible, cast your commander, use your commander to win the game. On the other hand, outside of these archetypes, we've just gotten so many good mana rocks. The Everflowing Chalice usually doesn't make the cut anymore, even in non-green decks, since we've gotten so many more options. So Everflowing Chalice in the right commander deck can be very good, but those decks are pretty few and far between. And the same is mostly true of Contagion Collapse. It sees play in -1/-1 counter theme decks like Scorpion God of Patra. Also sees play a little bit in infect decks like Skithiryx or Finn, where you can proliferate the poison counters you give your opponent. But again, these are pretty narrow archetypes. If you're playing 99% of commander decks, Contagion Class really has no value to you, but in very specific archetypes, it can be a really good card. We also got Qasali Pride Mage, which is a card that used to be a lot better than it is today. So a 2-drop that can sack to blow up an artifact and enchantment and has Exalted, that used to be a really sweet card in formats like Modern. The problem is, it's mostly been outdone by Knight of Autumn, the decks that want Qasali Pride Mage. Typically, Collected Company, Court of Calling style decks that can find creatures. The problem is, if you're thinking about a Selesnya creature that can get hit by Collected Company or found by Court of Calling, and you can play in your sideboard to like blow up an artifact or enchantment, Knight of Autumn kinda does everything Qasali Pride Mage does, but then a whole bunch more as well. Gaining life against aggro, where Qasali Pride Mage is pretty bad. So Knight of Autumn has kind of pushed Qasali Pride Mage out of Modern. On the other hand, it does show a bit of play in Commander, where you play in cat decks, where it is one of the best cats, good enough at least to be one of the 40 best cats or something in Magic, plus blowing up artifacts and enchantments, really good in Commander. Also, Exalted style decks like Rafik can take advantage of it. So Qasali Pride Mage, it looks sharp in Old Border. Not as playable in Modern as it was a few years ago, but still a relatively solid card. Next up, we got Vintage All-Star Lavinia Azorius Renegade, and this is one of the weirder Old Border cards, because it really only sees play in Vintage. In Vintage, making it so your opponent can't cast free spells means if you can play this like on turn 1, all of a sudden your opponent's Moxen and Black Lotuses are going to get countered, which is really powerful, plus hating on non-creature spells with converted mana costs greater than the number of lands you control is also really good in a format where people are built around the Soul Ring boring Moxen Black Lotus mana plan. Like, if you're trying to cast something big, Lavinia is probably going to stop you if you're trying to use artifact mana. Outside of Vintage, doesn't see much play, but this is a shout out to Vintage players everywhere, and probably going to be really important in that format. Moving from the world of Vintage to the world of Modern, we have Bloodbraid Elf. Bloodbraid Elf. Classic Jund card. It was at one point so good it was banned in Modern. It has now made its return, and it does see a decent amount of play in like Jund decks, Gruul mid-range style decks, where it's just a 2-for-1. You cast it, you get a 3-2 with haste, and then you're going to spend a, I don't know, Tarmogoyf, Renin 6, a Thoughtseize, something like that. Also shows up in Cascade-themed commander decks of Verna, Yidris, Maelstrom Wanderer. If you're just all about cascading, Bloodbraid Elf is one of the best Cascade creatures, in best Cascade spells, period, to ever be printed in the history of Magic, plus looking really sharp in the old border. Next on our list, we got Temur Ascendancy, which I honestly didn't realize was as heavily played in Commander as it is. So Temur Ascendancy, giving all your creatures haste and drawing your cards when big things come into play, makes it the #1 Temur card in the format, and one of the 50 most played multicolor cards, and that includes mana rocks that are multicolored, like Signets, for example. So Temur Ascendancy, actually kind of a commander staple if you're playing a deck in its colors, or a 5-color deck that has a bunch of big creatures, like Surak, the Ur-Dragon, Omnath. Temur Ascendancy is great. Haste is great, card draw is great. Combine those together, and you have a commander all-star that, look, are really nice in the old border. I feel like I say that a lot, but I really like the old border. Next up, we have Guild of Guid, probably better known as Field of Ruin. And Field of Ruin, it is a staple of Modern, essentially. You don't play it in Commander because it ramps all your opponents. Maybe if you're group hugging, you would, or if you're trying to troll Vince. But outside of those scenarios, not very good in Commander, but it is the second most played colorless land in Modern, behind Blast Zone, and actually pretty close to Blast Zone. Shows up in like 13% of decks, I believe. So this is one that I'm expecting to see out of blue-white control decks, out of decks trying to deal with Tron lands, creature lands in Modern, and gonna be pretty popular there. We also got Hedron Archive, which should have been Tomer's preview, I think. Tomer loves Hedron Archive from what I've heard. I mean, which makes sense. Tomer likes drawing cards, and Hedron Archive, it does draw you cards. Seriously, though, Hedron Archive, I like this card a lot in Commander. Hedron Archive shows up a lot in my Commander decks. It's a very divisive card. Some people view it as bad ramp and bad card draw. I view it as, yeah, bad ramp and bad card draw, but if you put those two things together, it's actually good. It's a mana rock that can draw me cards when I run out of cards later in the game. So I consider Hedron Archive not quite a Commander staple, but definitely a very playable mana rock that looks really sharp with the old brown border. We also got a really weird one in Ancient Dead. So Ancient Dead, an artifact land, banned in Modern, although let me know what you think about that. Should the artifact lands be unbanned in Modern? I kind of think maybe we've reached the point where we should at least try unbanning them and see what happens. Like, Affinity's not much of a thing anymore. Mox Opal's banned. Maybe Ancient Den and Friends would be fine. So because it's banned in Modern, it shows up a little bit in artifact-based Commander decks. It is an iconic card, famously banned in Standard during the Affinity era. So, I mean, I guess a fine reprint, although probably one of the old border cards you're going to be least excited to open. Next up, we have Old Border Abrupt Decay, which has proven to be good enough to remain a viable option across 60 card formats, even despite cards like Assassin Trophy and a bunch more removal spells being printed. The combination of uncounterable and the efficiency of older formats, where hitting any non-land CMC3 or less essentially hits most non-lands, makes it a really solid removal option, and it kind of shows up across formats in Pioneer. It shows up in 5-color Niv decks, where Nivs finds it. In Modern, probably the most classic home is Jund decks as a removal spell. In Legacy, it shows up in combo decks like Ant, Ad Nauseam Tendrils, where it can blow up a lot of the hate cards that would shut down your combo. It even shows up in Vintage in Oko, like Sultai midrange style piles. So, Abrupt Decay, yeah, it's a card that people are going to want because it sees play all over the place. Finally today, in the world of low rarity stuff, Utopia Mythicon, solid $5 uncommon Chromatic Star, always worth $1 or $2 because it sees a lot of play. Even though it's uncommon and has been reprinted, the new art on it, oh man, looks spectacular. Also, the return of the storage land cycle, which most have been reprinted a lot, don't really see 60 card format play, but do show up a little bit in Commander, also relevant for Limited for fixing. Otherwise, just a ton of stuff to round out draft decks. Remember, keep an eye on the Suspend stuff if you play Limited. Penumbra Spider, also really good in Limited. Imperiozar is huge, so yeah, tons of sweet stuff to round out your draft decks. Maybe a little bit you can play in Commander. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Time Spiral Remastered spoilers for today. So, what do you think? How excited are you for Old Border Panharmonicon? We got so much value today. What super expensive card are you most hyped to get at a discount once Time Spiral Remastered comes out? What about all the random gold in Artifact, Old Border stuff, all those reprints? What one are you most hyped for? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.